The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
Chapter 10. Preparation for Delusion. One of the major purposes behind the U.S. space program is the search for ETs, which most serious scientists today are convinced exist, in varying stages of evolutionary development on billions of planets scattered throughout the universe. Like Robert Jastrow, the vast majority of scientists assumes that evolution has produced many creatures out there somewhere whose mind powers would seem supernatural to us. The celebrated Israeli psychic, Uri Geller, believes that highly evolved ETs from another planet, acting as special agents for the, quote, controllers of the universe, unquote, have chosen him as their ambassador to Earth. They are channeling psychic powers through Uri as intermediary in a plan to gain our confidence and direct our further evolutionary development. When Stanford Research Institute was making its documentary film about him, Uri Geller complained that most psychologists insisted upon attributing his psychic powers to his subconscious. Uri explained that the source of power was not his mind, but in other minds out there tuned toward him every second, whose bidding he must do. Far from ridiculing this seemingly outrageous idea, the SRI scientists involved in the tests admitted that they had long suspected that ETs were behind PSI phenomena, but had not been able to prove it. There is grave concern as to the identity, motivation, and goal of the ETs involved, and whether or not they may have the psychic powers to take over our minds if they wish to do so. A brilliant medical scientist with scores of patents to his credit, Andrija Puharich brought Uri Geller to the attention of Western science. Puharich's experiences with the entities that are using Uri Geller have left him puzzled and helpless. Referring to these ETs, Puharich has said, quote, "We're pretty low creatures compared to the kind of stuff they're dazzling us with. Are they going to take us over?" Unquote. He was concerned by the apparent ability of a group of entities that refers to itself as is to control his mind to the extent of causing him to experience things that could not possibly have happened. Almost in despair, Puharich declared, quote, "These 2 days' events numbed me. Sarah and Uri experienced one sequence, and Ela and I experienced another, in the same time frame. That is real in my mind to this day. The four of us had had an experience imprinted on our minds by what could only be the agency of is. Given the existence of is, I could never again know which of my experiences were directly imposed upon me by is and which were not. I have never been so deeply shaken in my life as when I realized the full implication of this power of is." Unquote. Psychological conditioning for deception. One of the most disturbing elements of UFO phenomena has been the fact that contactees very often become disoriented, lose segments of time, experience altered states of consciousness, and develop the classic symptoms of demon possession. With impeccable scientific credentials and one of the world's top ufologists, Jacques Vallée has concluded after 20 years of investigation that UFOs may be psychologically programming us for some ultimate deception that is too horrible even to imagine as yet. The deception may actually go far deeper than Vallée or almost anyone else dares to suspect. Alleged abductees almost never have a conscious memory of the experience. How do they learn of their quote-unquote abduction aboard a UFO? Nightmares and psychological problems cause them to seek psychiatric help. In the process of being regressed back in time under hypnosis, the quote-unquote memory of the abduction is uncovered by the therapist. Whether UFO occultism is myth, magic, or madness, its high priests are psychiatrists, and the religious ritual they employ is hypnosis. One reason for calling hypnotherapy a religious ritual is the fact that it produces mysterious effects that leave any investigator who approaches it as science thoroughly puzzled. First, under hypnosis administered by psychiatrists, persons who have never had any contact with UFOs can be stimulated to quote-unquote remember UFO abductions that conform in detail to those described by supposed genuine abductees. Second, Hypnosis also leads to spontaneous quote-unquote memories of past and future lives, about 1/5 involving existence on other planets. Third, hypnotic trance also duplicates the experiences common under the stimulation of psychedelic drugs, TM, and other forms of yoga and Eastern meditation. Fourth, hypnosis also creates spontaneous psychic powers, clairvoyance, out-of-body experiences, and the whole range of occult phenomena. And fifth, the experience of so-called clinical death is also produced under hypnosis. Two conclusions that most investigators find very distasteful seem nevertheless to be inescapable. First, there is a common source behind all occult phenomena, including UFOs, that seems to be intelligently and deliberately orchestrating a clever deception for its own purposes. And second, hypnosis, or the power of suggestion, is at the very heart of this scheme. If this hypothesis is rejected, then nothing makes sense. The researcher is then left, like Professor Alvin H. Lawson of California State University at Long Beach, to mutter, quote, "The nature of the stimulus here is a very spooky thing," unquote. In light of the above, it is very disturbing to notice the growing acceptance and use of hypnosis under a wide variety of labels and variations in almost every area of society today, including medicine, psychiatry, business, and education. Is it possible that the current proliferation of hypnosis in its many modern forms is part of a process to prepare humanity for some much larger deception? The disturbing fact that deception is an integral and inescapable part of hypnosis has recently been recognized officially by the courts, yet it is still used by many so-called Christian psychologists. Professor of Psychology Charles Tart reported the results of his study of hypnosis with an intelligent, well-adjusted 21-year-old college student named William. The connection between hypnosis and Eastern mysticism became clear. At varying depths of the hypnotic trance, William described experiences that are identical to the cosmic consciousness and self-realization induced by yogic trance. He experienced, first of all, a deep peace, then detachment from his body, then release from identity with his own small self to merge with the universe, and the feeling that he is everything and has no limitation upon what he can experience or become. That is, God consciousness, quote, in which time, space, and ego are supposedly transcended, leaving pure awareness of the primal nothingness from which all manifested creation comes, unquote. Hypnotic trance opens the subject to exactly the same source of delusion that is experienced in TM and other forms of Eastern meditation, which is the same as that experienced under drugs. Based upon years of research, two well-known authorities on hypnosis, medical Dr. William Kroger and psychologist William Fessler, warn against being, quote, confused by the supposed differences between hypnosis, Zen, yoga, and other Eastern healing methodologies. Although the ritual for each differs, say Kroger and Fessler, they are fundamentally the same, unquote. In their excellent booklet summarizing the latest findings on hypnosis, which everyone ought to read, Martin and Deidre Bobgan declare, quote, compounding the word hypnosis with the word therapy does not lift the practice from the occult to the scientific. The white coat may be a more respectable garb than feathers and face paint, but the basics are the same. Hypnosis is hypnosis, whether it is called medical hypnosis, hypnotherapy, autosuggestion, or anything else. Hypnosis in the hands of a medical doctor is as scientific as a dowsing rod in the hands of a civil engineer, unquote. Hypnosis, the courts and society. The darling of criminal investigators and secret weapon of super sleuths, hypnosis has been widely used in law enforcement. It was hypnosis, for example, that broke the famous Chowchilla, California kidnapping case. Under hypnotic regression, the bus driver was able to, quote-unquote, remember the license number of the kidnapper's vehicle, though he had no conscious memory. In the 1980s, however, hypnosis is being exposed as a charlatan and expelled from the courts. The Supreme Court of California recently, quote, barred the use of virtually all testimony from witnesses who have been hypnotized in an attempt to refresh their memories, unquote. This follows similar rulings by the Supreme Courts in Arizona and Minnesota, and other states such as Maryland seem sure to follow soon. What could be wrong with hypnosis, this tested and honored technique that is so widely used in psychotherapy and accepted as a valid tool of medical science by the American Medical Association? Why rob the police of a weapon that has cracked so many cases? In its decision, the California Supreme Court cited, quote, an overwhelming consensus among experts that hypnosis-induced testimony is frequently unreliable because the technique could result in creation of pseudo-memories or fantasies, unquote. Contrary to the confidence expressed by experts for years, it has been discovered that, quote, hypnosis is just as likely to dredge up false information as true accounts of past events, and individuals can and do lie under hypnosis, unquote. One of the foremost experts on hypnosis, Bernard Diamond, professor of law and clinical psychiatry, states that, quote, hypnotized persons graft onto their memories fantasies or suggestions deliberately or unwittingly communicated by the hypnotist, unquote, and thereafter cannot differentiate between the original factual memory and the hypnotically produced alteration. Moreover, in the California Law Review, Professor Diamond insists that hypnosis is so rooted in deception that it is impossible to prevent distortion and fabrication from entering in. How could one then rely upon a psychiatric quote-unquote therapy that utilized hypnotically induced memories? This is not, however, the worst problem with hypnosis. There is another mysterious factor that sheds further light on the spontaneous production of psychic powers and quote-unquote memories of UFO abductions, clinical death, yoga, and drug trips. Hypnosis restores quote-unquote memories of actual facts that, strangely enough, were never known. The popular quote-unquote rebirthing is one example. In this process, the subject is regressed back into the womb to discover traumas suffered there which are allegedly still causing psychological problems. Validity of this hypnotherapy is seemingly supported by the fact that the subjects describe in factual detail their births, including persons present, clothes worn, instruments used, conversations, and surroundings. The source of this data could hardly be the brain, however, since a newly born baby could not understand conversations taking place at its birth. Moreover, even if it could, as the Bobgan state, quote, this all flies in the face of the well-known neurological scientific fact that the myelin sheathing is too underdeveloped in the prenatal, natal, and early postnatal brain to store such memories, unquote. The obvious implication is that other minds, ETs, are using the hypnotic trance to implant a factual quote-unquote memory that never existed in the subject's brain. Whoever these entities are, they are somehow familiar with what happened at the birth in question and have their own reasons for assisting the psychiatrist and his patient in restoring a memory that never existed. This conclusion is distasteful to materialists who instead dream up fantasies about language ability existing in genes and memories being stored in some mysterious inner mind. The following case, however, involved a memory that could not possibly have existed in the genes or inner mind and demands the admission that it was implanted by some intelligence that was able to use the hypnotic trance to its own mysterious ends. Quote, following a murder in Joliet, Illinois last year, an eyewitness who was unable to recall the face of the murderer was hypnotized by a police force hypnotist. Although the crime had occurred at night and the witness had been almost 100 yards away, he was able under hypnosis to zoom in on the murderer's face and identify him as a former classmate. The suspect was brought to trial on the basis of the eyewitness identification and might have been convicted, had not an ophthalmologist testified that, under conditions like those on the night of the murder, accurate resolution of images was impossible beyond 30 feet, unquote. In this case, the witness never saw the murderer's face with his physical eyes. There was, in fact, no visual imprint on the brain to be recalled. What was the source, then, of the quote-unquote memory that was brought forth under hypnosis? There is no indication that it was produced by suggestion from the police hypnotist. It would have been thrown out of court on that basis. It was the fact that physical identification had been impossible that convinced the judge that something was not right. This case seems to fit the pattern of hypnotically induced, non-existent memories of UFO abductions, drug trips, astral travel, clinical death, and birth. Clearly, these memories have a common non-human source whose deliberate purpose has been to convince humanity that all is one, that the universe is a living organism, a great mind of which we are all part, and that human consciousness is the link to all knowledge and power. The only alternative to this Eastern mystical view is found in the Bible, that there is not just one great mind, but many individual minds, each with the power of choice. ETs are not humanoids, but either angels or demons, the former serving God the Creator, the latter having rebelled against Him to follow Satan. The philosophy promoted by the phenomena that hypnosis produces is exactly what the Bible attributes to Satan. This identifies the ETs as demons. Rejecting that idea as mere superstition, the New Age prefers to accept without question the implanted suggestion. Indeed, suggestion in a variety of forms has become the panacea of the New Age, from psychotherapy, positive and possibility thinking, and autosuggestion self-improvement tapes and techniques to mantras, chanting, and creative visualization that is believed to produce whatever one really wants. The Suggestion Messiah of the New Age. Of all the false messiahs of recent times, none seems less likely than Émile Coué. Yet few people have played a more important part in the preparation of the world for the Antichrist than the almost comic, quote, originator of the psychotherapeutic system called Couéism, unquote. Involving, quote, frequent repetition of the formula, every day and in every way I am becoming better and better, unquote, Couéism was the modern forerunner to self-help and other New Age groups and beliefs that are proliferating at an almost unbelievable rate across the United States in the 1980s and even infiltrating the church. While working as an obscure pharmacist in Troyes, France, around the turn of the century, Émile Coué, quote, observed his patients receiving from certain drugs beneficial effects that could not be ascribed to the medicines. That led him to believe that it was the power of imagination that affected the cure, unquote. This discovery launched Coué into a study of hypnosis around 1901, with special interest in the apparent therapeutic effects of self-hypnosis. The modern applications of hypnosis have their roots in quote-unquote mesmerism. However, it was Coué who carried Mesmer's theory to its logical conclusion and thereby laid the foundation for the New Age. Franz Anton Mesmer received his medical degree from the University of Vienna. His doctoral dissertation, Influence of the Planets, carried the astrology of his day into medicine, attempting to show the influence of a, quote, planetary force field, unquote, upon human bodies and thus health. Learning in 1774 that a Jesuit priest, Father Maximilian Hell, was performing remarkable cures with magnets, Mesmer quickly recognized a logical application of his thesis. As Saz says, quote, magnetism, originally a property of some ferrous metals, became in Mesmer's mind an omnipresent force, unquote. To Mesmer, it seemed logical that the manipulation of this force with magnets could hold the key to curing all disease. He soon discovered, however, that he really did not need to wave magnets over his patients' bodies. He could achieve the same results by using only his hands. Mesmer explained this as a biological force called animal magnetism, a term he coined in 1775. The similarity is obvious between mesmerism and the New Age belief that the manipulation or realignment of psychic forces within the body's alleged chakra system is the key to healing, knowledge, and power. The connection between mesmerism, Couéism, Eastern mysticism, and astrology is clear. The New Age application of this quote-unquote ancient wisdom has been neatly expressed by W. Brew Joy, medical doctor turned guru. Quote, the chakras are the centers for these energies, both inside the body and immediately outside it. Known for thousands of years in Eastern philosophy, the chakras are inextricably associated with the various states of awareness. Tapping these energies is fire, and the consequences can be psychosis, aggravation of neuroses, acceleration of disease processes, and suicide. But the awakening into certain states of consciousness can bestow gifts of such value that they are beyond price. gifts such as the mastery of any or all of the psi phenomena, healing powers not yet recognized by conventional Western science, and deep serenity and knowledge of life. That the chakra system exists is beyond doubt, but no one, not one person, knows what it actually is or all of its aspects, and no one has ever known despite attempts over thousands of years to master this knowledge. My tentative belief is that the chakra system is capable of being directed by thought and capable of converting matter into various forms of energy, and vice versa, transcending the constraints of time and space." Unquote. Autosuggestion for self-mastery. After years of diligent study and experimentation, Coué perfected his system of quote-unquote self-mastery. He is generally credited with coining the word autosuggestion, which he popularized in his lectures and his book, Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion. Quote, stressing that he was not primarily a healer, but one who taught others to heal themselves, unquote. The French pharmacist claimed to have effected organic changes through autosuggestion, unquote. This was in contrast to Mesmer, who, unaware of the power he had uncovered, specifically avoided anything except psychosomatic problems. One of the earliest pioneers of the free clinic concept, Coué seemed to be genuine in his concern to help others. In 1910, he set up a free clinic in Nancy, France, to practice his now perfected system. The results were so phenomenal that Coué's fame spread across Europe and even to America. In 1920, he set up a clinic in New York. During his speaking tours of the United States and Europe, quote, even the largest lecture halls could not contain the enthusiastic crowds thronging to see the master himself repeat the famous words, "Every day and in every way, I am becoming better and better," unquote. This, quote, chant of the devotees of Émile Coué was sweeping the nation in the 1920s, unquote. Preaching remarkable powers of suggestion, the Messiah of the New Age had arrived before his time. In spite of the cure of so many serious ailments by the power of suggestion that Couéism affected throughout the Western world, Coué's system eventually fell into disrepute. Couéism failed because it was taken to be exactly what its originator claimed, a system. As Coué's followers forgot to believe what they were saying and chanted the magic words more and more mechanically, the cures became less and less, until no one believed anymore. Had Coué only lived into the New Age, he would have seen himself fully vindicated in the adoption of hypnosis by the American Medical Association and its growing use by psychologists and psychiatrists. The old master would be pleased, too, to see in the 1980s a host of self-improvement techniques based upon the very same, quote, power of suggestion, unquote, that he was convinced could cure anything. Positive thinking, possibility thinking, self-hypnosis tapes by the thousands, numerous salesmanship and management success seminars used by both Christians and non-Christians, positive mental attitude, PMA seminars, EST, Erhard seminars training, LifeSpring, Silva mind control, alpha level training, biofeedback, guided imagery, creative visualization, confluent education, psychotherapies by the score, and an almost endless list of other New Age self-improvement techniques. Seeing Mesmer's quote-unquote universal force as mental rather than physical, Coué recognized that the secrets of animal magnetism was very simple: suggestion. This idea has been revived today through drugs and Eastern mysticism as the, quote, consciousness revolution, unquote, that ushered in the New Age, and it has been popularized by George Lucas, a devout believer in and evangelist of Mesmer's force, through his Star Wars series of movies. Whereas Mesmer publicly declared that, quote, he could help only people suffering from nervous disorders and no others, unquote, Coué demonstrated that the power of suggestion has no such limits. The New Age is a revival of Coué's adaptation and extension of Mesmer's limited theory, that human potential is unlimited because the mind through suggestion can accomplish and create anything that it believes it can. Or can it? Could this be a delusion deliberately created by other minds from another dimension? A placebo-prone generation. Whether it is a sugar pill, a saline solution, or whatever, a placebo's composition makes no difference at all. Its power is in the suggestion that is made to the patient at the time it is given. Whatever the patient believes the placebo is supposed to do will become his experience. A placebo can poison as well as cure. It works about 50% of the time. Modern science has no explanation for it. We only know that the secret of the placebo is the same power of suggestion that creates factual memories that never existed and produces psychic powers and mystical experiences, and that those who fall most easily into deep hypnosis receive the greatest benefit from placebos. For all the good that this strange quirk of the human mind produces, there are two troublesome facts associated with it. As Dr. Joy admits concerning the chakra system, first, no one on earth knows how suggestion works, and second, it can be very dangerous. Placebos can kill as well as cure. The strangest part is that so many New Agers are willing to play around with alleged mind powers that are beyond comprehension and potentially deadly. Could it be that certain other minds out there are not only deceiving Uri Geller and Andrija Puharich, but everyone else who plays this same game? The bait on the hook is clearly those, quote, gifts of such value that they are beyond price, unquote, that so excite Brew Joy and other New Agers. Our contrary scenario will eventually demonstrate that the purpose behind this deception is to prepare the world for the Antichrist. The basic placebo mentality lies at the heart of the New Age. It does not matter how or why something works, only that it does work. This is the case for the numerous New Age self-improvement techniques being used in medicine and psychiatry and PMA success methods that we have already referred to, for which there is no scientific explanation, yet they are accepted as quote-unquote scientific simply because they work. It is Couéism's power of suggestion, revived with a vengeance and turned loose upon today's society on a scale that would make Coué's chest burst with pride. In an age when science has replaced God, the endorsement of the power of suggestion by science has opened our generation to the very deception that Christ warned would precede his second coming. The significance of today's revival of Couéism under various new labels can hardly be overstated. New Age thinking rests upon a childlike faith in the quote-unquote power of suggestion to transform consciousness, to cure disease and environment, and eventually to produce a new world of peace and prosperity. This attitude has spawned a generation of placebo-prone individuals with unprecedented vulnerability to deception, ideal for the coming Antichrist to take advantage of, and programmed to accept as truth any lie that can be quote-unquote experienced subjectively. Called, quote, the yoga of the West, unquote, biofeedback has become one of the new darlings of science, yet it has been demonstrated that false biofeedback data also produce the same results. Some experts who use it confess that, quote, biofeedback may be the ultimate placebo, unquote. Psychotherapists and Christian psychologists and preachers resort to flattery, distortion, and lies in order to convince the patient that psychotherapy is working and or that they are worth so much that God loves them. In group therapy, total strangers tell each other that they love them or how wonderful they are, simply to build up their quote-unquote self-esteem. It is one big charade of feeding placebos to ourselves and to each other. The famous humanist psychologist Carl Rogers has said, apparently in all earnestness, quote, objective facts are quite unimportant. The only facts of significance are the feelings which the client is able to bring into the situation, unquote. The entire human potential movement is based upon the belief that there is unlimited power and wisdom within the human psyche that can be released by suggestion and visualization. As a generation, we seem to be seeking the ultimate placebo, a way out of the human dilemma, an escape from the threat of ecological and or nuclear holocaust through a change in consciousness. Will this be our ultimate downfall? The magic key to the New Age transformation of consciousness that is being popularly pursued today is the subconscious. It is therefore extremely disturbing, for example, in a lengthy brochure offering self-hypnosis tapes to cure or accomplish almost anything, from bust and personality development to accelerated learning and personal happiness through suggestion and the power of the subconscious, to read that, quote, the subconscious stubbornly insists on believing everything it sees or hears. The subconscious is unable to make judgments. It cannot distinguish between right and wrong, good and bad, true and false. It willingly accepts as an absolute fact everything that is fed into it, and then tries to impose its will upon our lives based on what may be completely false information. The subconscious is just too powerful for us to control." Unquote. Amazingly, after telling us the above, that the subconscious cannot be trusted at all, the brochure bases everything it promises upon the, quote, power of the subconscious, unquote. It goes on to explain that the subconscious can be made to work for us through hypnosis, and there are no limits to what positive suggestions can accomplish if properly directed to the gullible, unconscious part of our minds. Eastern mysticism, as practiced in TM and other forms of yoga, is one of the most powerful deceptions exerted by autosuggestion upon the alleged subconscious. In spite of all objective evidence to the contrary, the delusion that all is one and that self is God is readily accepted and experienced in deep yogic trance. It is this further extension of mesmerism and kueism that the Hindu and Buddhist gurus brought to the West. One of the most important gurus in this century was a young Brahmin from India, whose story is instructive. The Theosophical Society. Several decades before H.G. Wells wrote about it, the plan formulated by higher intelligences to install a world ruler was known to other writers, among them Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and Annie Besant. Quote-unquote revelations of the plan through psychic means began shortly after the founding of the Theosophical Society in New York City on November 17, 1875, under the leadership of Helena Blavatsky and Colonel Henry Olcott. The teachings of Theosophy, often called the ancient wisdom or the wisdom religion, combine Gnosticism and the mysticism of Egypt, India, and China with certain elements in the philosophies of Plato and Plotinus. This spiritual smorgasbord is very much on target with the ET's ultimate goal, to combine all religions into one all-embracing creed that everyone can accept, thus preparing the way for the Messiah for all religions. A spirit medium and a loose-living adventuress, Madame Blavatsky was one of the early advocates and practitioners of free sex. In addition to the blatant opposition to biblical morals which she picked up from quote-unquote higher intelligences that she contacted in trance, Blavatsky also absorbed their hatred for the cardinal biblical doctrines. After writing her viciously anti-Christian Isis Unveiled, she authoritatively defined Theosophy's beliefs and goals in the Secret Doctrine, which later held a strange fascination for Adolf Hitler and Sirhan B. Sirhan, the assassinator of Robert F. Kennedy. Through reading the Secret Doctrine, in 1889, Annie Besant, a chief spokesperson for the Fabian Socialists and one of several women with whom George Bernard Shaw was entangled at the time, was converted to yet another cause. She became an immediate and enthusiastic Blavatsky disciple. A highly talented, energetic, and emotional person, Annie had gone from one cause to another, from the rejection of her earlier evangelical faith to a desire to become a nun, to involvement in the Oxford movement and the mysticism and sensual imagery of high church ritual. A disastrous marriage to a dominating clergyman brought embittered rejection of all established religion, especially Christianity. Obsessed with the desire to prove that salvation was not through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ for man's sins, as she had once believed, Annie Besant became a powerful influence in laying the foundation for the apostasy predicted in the Bible. The Annie Besant Revelations. Madame Blavatsky died in 1891, and Annie Besant became president of the Theosophical Society in 1907. Together with the homosexual clergyman C.W. Ledbetter, co-director of the society, Mrs. Besant developed further applications of Darwin's theory to karma and reincarnation, similar to the theories that Edgar Cayce and Teilhard de Chardin would also promote. The acceptance of Darwin's theory was one of the early moves of science into Eastern mysticism, which had always taught quote-unquote cosmic evolution of animals and men upward to oneness with God. Evolution is also quote-unquote verified under hypnosis. Years before quote-unquote past lives therapy would become popular with psychiatrists in the West, Mrs. Besant clairvoyantly explored her past lives and allegedly discovered that in one of her previous reincarnations, as a large monkey, she had died in the process of saving the lives of the Buddha-to-be and his family. Because of this heroic karma-improving deed, the Besant monkey had become human at the moment of its death, thus taking a giant step in its upward evolution toward ultimate union with the Absolute. Through her practice of yoga meditation, similar to TM, Mrs. Besant also had revelations of the future. It was quote-unquote revealed to her in 1909 that the Messiah was a young Brahmin disciple of Theosophy named Jiddu Krishnamurti. Annie prophesied that the, quote, world teacher, or guiding spirit of the universe, described as the invisible head of every religion, unquote, would manifest itself by taking, quote, possession of Mr. Krishnamurti's body, unquote. This would be the ascended master, or Christ spirit, that had allegedly taken possession of the body of Jesus of Nazareth during his life upon earth. Krishnamurti was identified as the latest in a long line of alleged reincarnations of the Christ spirit. The crux of his mission in the world, in preparation for the New World government to follow, would be to, quote, combine all religions into one new worldwide religion, unquote. The similarity to Gene Dixon's vision of a Messiah who will, quote, bring together all mankind in one all-embracing faith with every sect and creed united, unquote, is obvious. In fact, upon this point there seems to be near unanimous agreement among all occultists. The acceleration of the apparent fulfillment of this long-standing plan through the present New Age movement is all the more significant in view of the fact that this is exactly what the Bible predicts for the quote-unquote last days, just prior to Christ's return visibly and in judgment. Mission Impossible. In 1911, 6,000 delegates of the Order of the Star in the East, listening to Krishnamurti, suddenly heard, quote, another voice of wondrous sweetness and power ring out through his lips, unquote, and Krishnamurti, quote, spoke in the first person as a god, unquote. According to a news report, some of the delegates, quote, bowed down to worship him, unquote. At the moment of this miraculous change in his voice, quote, a great coronet of brilliant shimmering blue appeared above his head, unquote, witnessed by the stunned onlookers. There were other equally convincing supernatural signs in the presence of large crowds. Preparations for ushering in the new Messianic age proceeded, with Krishnamurti tutored by Ledbetter and Besant. In 1926, Mrs. Besant brought this quote-unquote chosen vessel to the United States. Already widely acclaimed in Europe, where he had been hailed as the, quote, leader of a new civilization, unquote, Krishnamurti needed only a favorable reception in the world's most powerful and influential nation to launch the new age. However, as his ship pulled into New York Harbor, Krishnamurti's occult powers suddenly and mysteriously left him. He had come to America to oppose historic Christianity, particularly its teaching about sin, repentance, judgment, and forgiveness through the death and resurrection of Jesus the Messiah, just as Vivekananda, founder of the Vedanta Society, and many others had done before him. Apparently that faith was still held by so many people in this country that it stripped Krishnamurti of the psychic power that had so impressed thousands in other parts of the world. Quote, even on shipboard in New York Harbor, Krishnamurti complained of what he called the electrical atmosphere intensity of New York and said he doubted that he would be able to meditate successfully there, unquote. Without the proper altered state of consciousness he achieved through Eastern meditation, Krishnamurti apparently lost touch with the spirit entities, ETs, that guided him and gave him his occult powers. The New York Times reported that Krishnamurti became almost incoherent during an interview aboard ship. Instead of manifesting any miraculous abilities, he came off as, quote, a shy, badly frightened, nice-looking young Hindu, unquote. Plans for Krishnamurti to speak in New York were canceled. In Chicago, for a convention of Theosophists, he complained of the, quote, bad atmosphere conditions, unquote, in America that he blamed for his loss of power. His planned national tour canceled, Krishnamurti went into seclusion. With Mrs. Besant's death in 1933, Jiddu Krishnamurti seemed to lose all memory of his association with the Theosophical Society and began to expound his own version of Eastern mysticism. His books are still very popular in the West today. A fascinating connection. Apparently, the ascended masters had not prepared America thoroughly enough, causing their plans to be aborted at that time. In the years since then, however, those behind the plan have done their work well. The quote-unquote atmosphere in America has become so agreeable for occultism that today millions of Americans practice the very same Eastern meditation that Krishnamurti found impossible in the United States only a few decades ago. In altered states of consciousness, Americans and Europeans are receiving psychic communications from the same ETs who have been in touch with yogis and witch doctors for centuries. Today's yogis are Nobel Prize winners, psychiatrists, physicians, sociologists, university professors, business leaders, and politicians, all part of the huge New Age movement that syncretizes Mesmer's hypnosis, Coué's powers of suggestion, and Freud's unconscious, id, into a New World religion that draws heavily from Eastern mysticism. Designed around a snake formed into a circle, the symbol of the Theosophical Society provides a fascinating link with a more recent and more important false messiah. The serpent's head and tail, yin and yang, meet behind a swastika, the symbol that most people associate with Hitler's Nazism. Banned from public display in Germany by the Allied forces of occupation, the swastika is still prominent on temples throughout the Orient, where it has been a sacred symbol in Buddhism and Hinduism for thousands of years. Hitler's connection with these religions, symbolized by his adoption of the swastika, is more than incidental. The false messiah who made the swastika infamous was a very serious devotee of black magic, which has its roots deep in Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. He was also the master of mass hysteria created by hypnotic powers of suggestion. Claiming to be the Messiah, he came the closest to being the Antichrist of any other figure in history. Before proceeding further, it will therefore be necessary to turn our attention to Hitler, to see what we can learn from him that will influence the development of our contrary scenario. The astonishing phenomenon of Germany's Messiah is very instructive in helping us to understand the progressive steps in the preparation of the world for the ultimate delusion that is hastening upon us.